Am I doing my interview on Joe Lauro? He is a jazz performer. Um, so Joe, how did you get into jazz?
I got into jazz by way of vaudeville. When I was a kid, for some reason, my mother dropped me on my head. I don't know what happened. I was very interested in people like Eddie Cantor and Al Jolson. Somehow I saw these people on TV late night when I was home from school or late night, whatever, and it just struck a chord. I think just the humanness and the power of their performance and just a person telling jokes and singing right in your face with great style and great talent. It hit me, and I got interested in that music, and I didn't really know where to get it. I knew it was on old records, so I would go around and people would give me old records. I'd look for them on my bike with my 50 cents allowance. You could get records for a couple of pennies a piece in the junk shops. And, how did I find jazz? Well, I'd get these records people would give to me, and some of them were the performers I liked, but then I'd hear these instrumental records that were like, it's really neat sound. It's so perfect, it's great. And I remember I had a kid that I went to school with that was a Boy Scout with me, and he said he had some records in his basement. And said, "Take what you want." So there was a record by a band called the Original Memphis Five, and it was a song called "Original Memphis Glide." And I put that thing on, and it's just like swung. I said, "Wow, what is this?" I'd never heard it, and this was the time of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and this music was so archaic and wild. So that record got me. I still have that record. I got interested in it through that, and I started finding more records and slowly listening and figuring out, what was the jazz and what was the vaudeville, and it was really so I got into it by being a record collector, as I still am. And I learned more and more, and then when I got to be a little bit older, I realized that I wasn't the only person collecting records. There were lots of people, and I got involved with a group called the Record Research. They called it the New York Syndicate, the Record Syndicate, with all the old researchers, and we'd bring musicians in and ask them, well, on May 28th, 1938, how many takes of Sugarfoot Stomp did you play? And they'd like look at it. Sometimes we'd get, anyway, we interviewed all the old guys. I met other collectors. I found out about more records. I listened to other stuff. And my interest became that way. At the time I was playing rock and roll, like every other kid was. But I slowly started realizing that I might be able to play that music as well.
Okay. Who or what influenced you to be a jazz collector, be a jazz performer?
Well, I think the first person that really influenced me in the whole thing was Joe Franklin. Joe Franklin was a TV show host. He's still living. He had a show called Memory Lane. It was on Channel 9 in New York, and we'd get it. And when I'd be home from school, his show was on like all afternoon, and he'd have anybody that did anything, from like a singing dentist to a canary that could talk, would be on this show. I mean, anyone could be on his show, but he'd show in between all that horrible stuff, he'd have film clips, and he would show clips of people like Eddie Cantor and Al Jolson, and he really influenced me. He was a record collector. I got to meet him, and while he didn't really get me into jazz, he got me into that whole world of early music, and the jazz just progressed. I mean, I guess the person that really was the first jazz collector that really pushed me in that direction was a guy named Ken Clement, who was another collector that kind of sat me down and said, "You gotta listen to this. This is King Oliver. Ooh. This is Louis Armstrong with his Hot Five, not Louis later on with his Hot Five in the 1920s. Ooh, wow, that's amazing. This is Big Spiderbeck, makes you want to cry. So people taught me. I knew, your ear gets better and better, and I got involved that way. So I really began as a record collector, and then being a musician. Playing that music came later, after I had all that stuff in my head.
Okay. Who is your favorite, jazz performer from that time? Like Louis Armstrong, Big
Jelly Roll
Spiderback?
Morton comes to the
Jelly
head.
Roll Martin.
But
And we
it's,
have his
yeah.
thing over there, if you
Yeah,
can
that's
see
that's
it.
an actual original Jelly Roll Morton poster. I found that only 2/3 of it existed, and we got somebody to reconstruct
Do
it.
a little.
That's a RCA Victor poster for Jelly Roll Morton from the 20s. And there's Al Jolson. But anyway, I guess Morton is my number one guy. The most individual piano player and arranger of early jazz. He went back to the early 20th century as a performer. He was born in 1885, so 1905 he was playing in Storyville, which was the red light district of New Orleans, traveling around, and he wrote the most amazing melodies, and he was a great ragtime early jazz player, and he really scored the first really great jazz records. Right behind him, maybe equal, is Louis Armstrong, Big Spiderbeck, all the classics. I'm what they call a moldy fig, meaning that my interest in jazz truly ends around 1935. Although I like a little bit of the bebop stuff before it gets too crazy, but I really like the early stuff.
Do you consider yourself a jazz performer?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do. I wouldn't say that I'm a great jazz musician, but I play in a band that does some of that stuff. I can play, I don't do it for my living. I do it as a very active hobby. I mean, I get paid to do it. And I can play a bit of it, but I guess I don't really see myself as a jazz musician. I see myself as a musician that can play a bit of jazz, It's a whole different discipline that I haven't really had the time to really do it in a great way. Maybe I'm just hard on myself.
You're just interested in the
Yeah,
records and everything. What are the most important jazz elements to you?
To me, melody and swing. Now, you lose that, you lose the melody part as you get more progressive with jazz. It becomes more solo, 20-minute solos that, you lose everybody on that. That's why jazz kind of really shrunk. It was America's popular music from like 1917 to about 1930. Jazz was what people listened to. Why? People are not sophisticated. They're not scholars. You don't need to be a scholar to be moved by a beautiful melody played by musicians that are weaving their instruments, where the trumpet is playing the lead, the clarinet is dancing on top of it, and the trombone is kind of accenting it. Playing a beautiful melody that swings, where there's a great rhythm section that is not stiff, but just moving, and the whole thing, you just want to get up and dance. And to me, those are the elements, swing and melody.
I agree with you. How do you see jazz progressing in the future?
Well, what I would like for it to be, and I don't know that this will ever happen, but you see, you've got concert halls around the world, and in these concert halls around the world are played Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, Stravinsky, all the great composers. Jazz is our contribution. Early jazz needs to be studied. It needs to be funded for educational purposes. It needs to be played. People need to be taught. First of all, they need to be shown how beautiful it is. They need to be taught how to play it, and people need to take it seriously as our great contribution to the music of the world. One of them, America, what is really the greatest contribution of America? Our music, jazz, blues, country, everything came from here, and jazz is number one.
Jazz has the richest story behind it.
And what needs to happen is it needs to be studied, it needs to be taught, and kids need to experience it. Young people today are not used to be entertained by human beings. They're entertained by electronic devices. That has to change. You go down to New Orleans, I was just there last week. There are kids, a lot of African American kids in these schools that are given instruments, and they play them because everybody plays. There's marching bands and brass bands still to this day, and they're playing and they're entertaining. And it's not unusual to just be standing there and see a guy with a tuba walk across the street. You don't see that in New York.
No.
You don't see that anywhere. That needs to be moved forward, and we need to start taking our heritage seriously. That's the only way it'll be kept alive.
How do you see jazz in the future? I mean, as right now in songs, do you find yourself hearing a little bit of jazz in songs, or do you think that it just completely died out of our music genre
Well,
this
jazz
generation?
progressed, they say, and progress is good or it's bad. It depends on your taste. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't really know modern jazz that well, but in a lot of the pop music I hear today, if you're talking about the straight ahead pop, I don't hear any jazz.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just call somebody playing a solo jazz, then maybe, but I don't think so. I don't hear jazz. I don't hear classic jazz. Maybe some sort of modern jazz that I don't really know about is an element, but no, I don't hear it. It's another genre unto itself. And I also think that in many ways jazz shot itself in its own foot, because, too much progress, you lose people. You know,
It's
it gets too
changing too
progressive,
much.
it gets too intellectual, it gets too masturbatory. I mean, anyone playing a solo for 20 minutes, who has that much to say that's going to keep you interested for 20 minutes as a soloist? Very few people, but they all think they could do it.
Hmm.
And a million notes means nothing. Give me two notes that are well placed and played with passion and clarity. And that says a hell of a lot more to me than a guy blowing a 20-minute solo. And I think that's what killed jazz, is because it went out of the realm of the sort of things that human beings will naturally respond to. I mean, I could make, a song that just by the way the notes are, it'll make you cry, or it'll make you sad, or it'll make you happy. And when you lose the elements of great songs being used in jazz and you're just playing solos, there's very little hope. It's going to be a niche thing for a very small audience, which is fine, but it can't progress too much beyond what regular folks like. Otherwise, it's just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Do you think that we're going to hit a time in the future where old jazz is going to come back in full swing and
I
we'll
hope
have that
so.
back again?
I think that it'll never come back in full swing because, in the old days, music was regional, meaning that if I was a kid and I wanted to learn how to play the guitar, I was, there was usually some old guy down the block that played, that I knew, that I met. He would sit on his porch and he'd play, and you'd want to play because it was so cool, and he'd show you, or you'd remember what he did and you'd figure it out yourself. But what happened is when mass media starts controlling, the way you get your music, it's like you're not just getting, blind Harry Blake sitting on his porch playing and everyone regionally knows him. You're watching MTV and everyone's getting the same music video throughout the world, and all the regional styles and all the things that make this music so great gets lost, because you're basically being programmed to what music you're going to listen to. And the people that sell records and sell CDs and downloads, they're sending that stuff out for you only for the reason that they want you to buy it. So if it means that Rihanna's gonna wear the tightest clothes in the world and point to her what, if that's what people are watching, that's what they're gonna get. And it's unfortunate. To find jazz is never gonna die. It's just always gonna be in little pockets that you need to seek out. It's never gonna go back to the way it was, but it'll never die. I mean, I am seeing a resurgence. Yes. I'm seeing these young hipster bands in Brooklyn of these kids in their 20s that are realizing this music is really cool, and they're playing it again. And it isn't just these old guys playing Dixieland with the straw hats. These are young kids that are grabbing it for the reasons that it's great, and they're learning it and they're playing it. So that's always going to be there. I just hope it gets a little bit bigger, but it's definitely not dead. And I would say right now there's a little bit of a resurgence happening in a really cool way that I've been noticing. Kids starting jug bands and all that. It's great. They're finding it. It's not easy to find. You got to really work to hear that, or be lucky enough to have experienced it and be influenced by it. So it won't go away, but it's always going to be something you're going to have to really work to seek out.
Do you think if you grew up in New Orleans, you would have a different approach to jazz?
I think if I grew up in New Orleans, I don't know about my approach, but it just would be a hell of a lot easier to get people to play it with. The problem that I have with my band, my band plays all New Orleans music. And I've got some great horn players in my band, but they really don't know that style. So when I'm playing like an old hymn that we're jazzing up, like Over in the Glory Land, they can read the notes, but when it comes to just asking them to play without that, playing in sort of a traditional jazz style, they don't really know how to approach it. They don't understand that they have to keep to a melody. They all start blowing Charlie Parker solos. And it's a little, you know, because they don't understand the style. If you stay in New Orleans, it's kept alive more. It would be just a lot easier for me to do it because I'd be able to find guys that really got it more, you know. And again, I have great musicians that I work with, but you really have to educate them about what to play on this stuff because they're so far away from it now with the passage of time, you know.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Brooklyn and in Massapequa till I was 18.
And did you pick up an instrument when you were younger and
When I
start
was
playing?
12 years old, I was 13 years old, I picked up the electric bass guitar. I still play it. And I had, you know, garage bands. You know, this would have been the late 60s, early 70s. I was in garage bands, and I still play that type of music. I still do enjoy that. So there's two sides of my musical thing. I mean, I think at this point, I love, you know, traditional jazz and New Orleans music better than anything now, but I do have an affinity towards, you know, that music as well. Rock and roll, funk, early rock and roll, rhythm and blues. I love it all.
Do you ever combine the two types of music together?
My band, the Houdat Loungers, combines, we're sort of a review. So
What was the name? The Houdat
we're
Lounge?
called the Houdat Loungers. We combine the funky New Orleans stuff that's played on the electric bass, the real funky stuff, the early rock and roll, because a lot of early rock and roll was born in New Orleans. Fats Domino, Little Richard recorded there with all New Orleans guys. And so we bring all that, and we also go to the real traditional kind of hymn-based marching jazz music and Louis Armstrong type stuff. We do all of that. So my band does combine it all. I really don't know any band around here in this area that's doing what we're trying to do. And we're making it accessible to a lot of people.
That's
You know,
fantastic.
yeah, it's a mission.
Who's the most influential or important jazz figure you know?
You mean that I
That you
like?
know, yes.
That I know as a living human being?
Yeah.
Or that I was influenced by?
Well, there's two different questions. There's,
All right, sure. Well, that I know.
well, who's the most influential jazz performer for you?
Jelly Roll Morton.
Yes.
Because, I mean, you just can't escape this guy. He not only was he an amazingly colorful character and a braggart and a great weaver of great stories and yarns. Nobody really knows. Everyone used to say that he was full of you know what, but now they're beginning to say that, you know something, some of this stuff that he said might be really true as research goes on and on. But Morton was one of the great ragtime crossover to jazz piano players. He wrote these wonderful melodies, and he was one of the first guys that took that music and orchestrated it for jazz. Just amazing stuff. And then right after that is, of course, Louis Armstrong, Bix Beiderbecke, the big three. Any guy that likes the music I like would probably give you the same answer. Duke Ellington, not so much. I like the freer jazz, like Bix and Louis Armstrong, his Hot Five. I like jazz that has an entertainment value too. And guys like Armstrong was playing the most provocative stuff at the time, but also was entertaining. The singing was funny. It was great. It was appealing. You know, it was really for mass approval and for mass, you know, consumption. And I like that. I like that part of jazz. You know, that's the stuff I like. You know, Morton, you know, Armstrong and Bix Beiderbecke, much more introverted guy, but one of the most lyrical and beautiful players of all time.
So right now in the jazz world, who's performing, who would influence you the most?
All right, well, I'm friends with a lot of the guys that I like now because
Yeah.
I'm a musician, and there's a fellow by the name of Tom McDermott who is one of the great piano players in New Orleans right now, and a fellow that he works with who's also a friend of mine named Evan Christopher. He's, for my money, he's about the greatest living, hot jazz clarinet player. He also plays Cuban music. A guy by the name of Dr. Michael White, another clarinet player who's more of a traditional guy that plays in the style of Johnny Dodds and Jimmy Noon and keeps that music going. He writes new tunes, but he's in that style. And these are guys that when I go down to New Orleans, I look for them. Where are they playing?
They're located in New Orleans?
I locate them. They're around. I look for them. I'll drive to see them. There's a bunch. There's a bunch of young guys. The whole scene is I'm not going to say exactly vibrant, but it isn't dead. And so when I'm influenced, and the people that I'm seeking today are within the styles that I like, and those are some of the guys that I always look for.
Absolutely. So, what are your future plans? Do you have a dream gig or?
Yeah. Well, my future dream with my band would be for us to get. We're pretty new, but this year compared to last year, we got twice as many gigs and calls. We're starting to get a lot of recognition, and I want to push it a little bit more into the real traditional New Orleans stuff and play it better than we're playing it now. So it's like anything. If you really love something, you want to make it better all the time, and you also want to make it popular. So what I want is to get the phone calls where I don't have to be begging for gigs. So people are calling me, they want the Houdat Loungers, and they know what we do. And when I could go out there and I could play some of the traditional music within the Houdat Loungers and play it right. And because you know why? Because then when I'm up on stage and I'm hearing that stuff and I'm playing it, it's the ultimate, fun, inspiring experience you could have. You could get that as a player, and you can get that as a listener. When you get it as a player, it adds just another whole dimension to it because you're helping to create it. And to me, I'll never get tired of that. As long as I can stand up and carry that bass fiddle. I'm also planning on learning how to play the tuba. In fact, I was just trying to find a teacher today. So, it keeps you inspired. And certainly keeps me inspired. So, always going to have plans. When I'm 80 years old, I'll have plans. As long as I'm still physically around.
What would you do if your band totally took off and you were world famous and you were one of those videos being played on MTV?
I'd enjoy the ride. I'm lucky because I own my own business, and I have the flexibility of if something like that happens, means you travel and all that. I would ride with it the best I can. I don't ever see that happening. I do see maybe that we would get on like sort of the festival circuit, which would mean that we'd have to travel around Europe and around. I'd like that. That's actually a goal too, that we play not so many bars, but we just play sort of festivals and concerts, because that's really what I think we're best at that. So we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
So here it is. What is it all about? It's about inspiration. It's music should inspire you. It should give you joy that you're not going to necessarily feel with certain types of music. But this jazz music, at its best, not only will make you want to dance and sing, but it'll just appeal to that as well. And that's the best of it. And that's what it should do.
So you want to show me some of your collection?
Sure.